All right, we're live.
It's Friday
Happy Friday,
afternoon.
John.
Yeah, you too.
How's it
Can
going?
you
Happy
t-
Masters Friday.
It's good. It's really good. And we had an incredible Easter, and so that was fun.
Wonderful.
Lots of family, and we're blessed to have your mom and dad in, so that was really
Yes.
good. And and we had a endless Easter egg hunt,
And
with your son.
endless. My son went crazy on the Easter egg hunt, and I think we did a total of like 10, I would probably say, throughout the day. We just had to keep hiding them.
Yep, same eggs hidden over and
Same
over
eggs,
again.
all empty,
Yeah.
just hiding the eggs.
Yep. And Susie said to me, if I had to guess his Colby's a high follow through because he just absolutely had a job to get done and he
Yes.
was on it, and he
Oh,
just kept
yes.
finding all those eggs.
A hundred
So,
percent. Yep,
so
I
part,
believe it, which is great. We need a follow through in this house. That's all I'm saying.
so let's start with a little bit of a Colby discussion because I think it's a
Yeah,
great
that sounds
way
great.
to get into how do I think about failing forward.
Cool.
Because inevitably, what we're trying to teach people is you have certain gifts that are just designed in, and Colby,
Yep.
of all of our assessments, maps that. And then the next thing we do is we go in and look at the Strength Finder, and then I think everybody knows at this point we do the 3-year future focus. But importantly, we then pivot over to the growth plan.
Yep.
And what we'll say to people is, look, if you want the same outcomes as you have today, then you don't need to grow.
Yeah.
But for everybody I can imagine in the untapped community today and in the future, it is all about growth,
Yep.
and investing in themselves and getting better outcomes. And
Mm-hmm.
so what we know is there's just a certain amount of risk taking that's required, to go down this path.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting to me, Allie, because the kinds of risk that will be required are very different for each
Okay.
individual. And if you
Okay.
said, well, why? Well,
Yeah.
it's pretty easy. You're not going to want to go in and take significant risks outside your gift zones,
Okay.
and you really aren't going to take significant risks outside your 3-year future focus. And you're also going to make sure that if you're taking risks, especially on the relationship side, that it's well thought out. Because
Yeah.
inevitably, we're asking people, go down your growth plan, look at the skill set. Are we going to need to
Yep.
take risks to develop new skills? Look at the knowledge set. Do we need to go
Mm-hmm.
take some risks to get more knowledge? Look at the experience set. Do we need to try new things to get new experiences? And then you go down to the relationship side. And then from there, you evolve into your belief systems, your
Okay.
attitudes, and your habits. And
Yeah.
so inevitably, we're identifying where we're stuck and we're identifying where we have to bring change in.
A
And
100%.
anytime you bring change in, you're taking
There's
risks,
conflict
you're trying new
sometimes too
things.
with that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But I want people to understand, that we ask clients to take risk, where A, there's a lot of reward, and
Yeah.
B, we also do it on a calculated basis.
Yeah.
So we're trying to do it within your gift zone.
Well, and I think one way that you've described it before is like strategic risk,
Yep.
where we know that depending on what the outcome is, it won't necessarily hurt us because we've thought it through and we've made the choice to go with a specific way no matter what the outcome is.
And so I love what you're saying there because it gets back to, well, can I learn and compound the learning over
Yes,
my lifetime?
exactly.
So and so Allie, a couple of things really stand out to me.
Mm-hmm.
Susie and I were watching a show on Apple the other day, which was
Yeah.
all about the first 5 years of somebody's life. And they
Yeah.
went in and they looked at different cultures,
Okay.
and it was just absolutely amazing looking at the kinds of risks that children were asked to take in the first 5 years of life in each
Yeah.
of those cultures. With one, a 2-year-old being asked to figure out how to swim, you know,
Yeah.
or they actually had a small Japanese child, and I think he was no more than 2 or 3, and he was going to go get dinner, you know, and so they had to navigate traffic, navigate a crosswalk, basically take money to, where they were ordering the meal, and
Wow.
and you're just like, oh my God. And then you did have to laugh a little bit. You kind of hit the U.S. and you hit the U.S. legal system and the
Yeah.
prevailing points of view in the U.S. And it's like, wow, it just seems like as a culture, when you look at the baby seats and, you know, you look at the, all the high
Uh-huh.
chairs and just all the amount of stuff that's been, ruled illegal for safety reasons and replaced, and then you look at all the amount of coaching that young moms have, and you've been through this, but at
Yeah.
the same time, you watch it when Trey grows the most, right? He's
Yeah.
taking risk, you
Oh,
know?
100%.
Yep.
100%. We were at the eye doctor this morning. My son has glasses, and he almost dumped out like all of the like lens things. He had learned that he can now climb on chairs and reach things, which is great, wonderful that you can now climb up on a couch and reach what you want to reach. But then it was like, oh no, he's going to dump out all of this glass all over the ground and I'm going to have to pay for it. I was like, oh, it was bad. Nothing fell. I caught it in time, but still.
But Allie, at the same time, it's so fascinating to see where even young children take risk. And I laughed when Kathy Colby told us that she could watch a 6-month-old playing with blocks and tell you what the Colby score was. But
Yeah.
the more I deal with clients and we help them through their Colby, it gets clearer and clearer, where they're most likely to take risk.
Yeah.
And, even to bring it home a little bit, Susie, my wife's profile is very different from mine on risk taking. And
Yeah.
and yet the overlap is where we're buying homes and redoing them. You know,
Yep.
I'm willing to roll the dice on the financial side,
Mm-hmm.
and negotiate the purchase and make the investments. And
Yeah.
she's highly comfortable taking risks, working on, things that are mechanical or things that, can be redesigned physically. And it's just a great
Exactly.
example where she's got a high implementer and, I've got a high quick start. And, it started with 1 or 2 properties in Kiowa, and then it evolved to 15 homes over time,
Yeah.
and yet it's been one of the
Crazy.
best and most valuable ways that we've taken risks to create value. Now,
Mm-hmm.
the other thing that I'd like to talk about, and this gets interesting,
Yeah.
so we talk about Trey and young children taking risk, and we start to see, where they're going to take risk. And I
Yeah.
always laugh when I watch the quick start come in, and you're a quick start.
Mm-hmm.
I'll talk to them and say, the first time you were on a tricycle at the top of the hill, did you go down really fast? And
Yeah.
and inevitably they go, yeah, how did you know that? Or, were you the kind of kid that when you got in your parents' car, you just had to play with every single instrument? You'd go for the
Mm-hmm.
radio, go for the turn signal, go for the horn. And
Yep.
again, these are all early indications of what kind of risk taker you are and why. And then it
Yeah.
gets interesting. We kind of take this initial risk and we grow so quickly in those first 5 years. And
Yeah.
then our learning curve kind of rolls over, you know,
Gotcha.
because we're operating within the confines of our parents, our
Yeah.
siblings, the
Mm-hmm.
school, and then we hit high school. And it's just interesting watching different people smile when you talk about high school, right?
Yeah. I mean, yeah,
You know,
that's definitely the time when you're most rebellious in your life, which is where the risk comes in. So it's who was rebellious and who was the good kid type thing.
well,
Yeah.
absolutely. And then the additional element is, where were you in the pecking order of your family and how much risk were your older siblings willing to take? How'd that influence mom and dad? how did that influence you?
Yeah.
And at the same time, and again, this maps so well back to intergenerational transmission, which is
Mm-hmm.
were you even allowed to take any risk in your family? You
Yeah.
know, and
Yeah.
and if so, in what context and what level of supervision? You know, but it is fun because all of a sudden you'll watch somebody come in and you'll say, "Well, how was high school?" And you wait for a response. And some people will say, "Well, I didn't do any of that bad stuff." And you're like, "I know that. I can tell from your Colby
Yeah.
and your risk profile whether you were going to be open to trying new things quickly or not." And we're
Yeah.
not asking you to change that, but we are
Mm-hmm.
asking you at times if we need to change behaviors and take some risks, we have to
Yeah.
kind of push that perfectionism out of you. We have to push
Okay.
this idea that you have to be perfect all the time when you start, you
Yeah.
know? And
Uh-huh. Well,
go
that's what,
ahead.
so I want to go back to one thing you said is like kind of
Uh-huh.
depending on your Colby score kind of depends on what kind of risk taker you will be.
Yep.
So can
Yep.
you explain that further? So like if I was a high integrator, meaning I like to work with my hands and get things
Yep.
done, what kind of risk taker would that be? Are you just meaning your combination of scores?
Well, it's going to be a combination, but let's take
Okay.
your high integrator for a minute. You're going to be drawn to machinery and equipment. You'll be
Yeah.
drawn to
Mhm.
anything from a golf club to a lawnmower to
Yeah.
a bandsaw, to a toolbox, and there's no doubt, the minute somebody brings a bandsaw into
Yeah.
their life, there's a higher degree of risk that begins to show up.
Yeah.
And, I know when I think about me with a chainsaw, I've
Yeah.
used one, but I'm probably not the right person to really be doing that kind of work, you know?
Yep.
But it's back to, well, where do you take risk and where don't you?
Yeah.
And how over time do you basically see that pattern and manage it? And at the same time, you can also take an inventory of who you hung around with in high school and why. And you
Yeah.
can also ask the question, were the parents of your friends glad when you walked in or nervous when you walked in? Because so often, our the parents of our best friends in high school kind of
Yeah.
figured out who we were and knew.
Yeah,
But
for
let's
sure.
face it, high school's a period of time where, you need to take some risk and try some new things. And
Yep.
then what we find is you advance that a little further in college, just depends on who you are. And
Yep.
and then finally you come out and you come into the work world and you're back into a much more controlled environment,
Yeah.
you know?
A hundred
And
percent.
yeah, and it's back to, okay, is this person going to go into a large company where there's lots of rules and process and procedures? Are they going to go into a medium-sized company, a small
Yeah.
company, or, should they be doing the entrepreneurial thing either alone or with others? But these are all
Mhm.
different elements of risk taking. Um,
Yeah.
and so the growth plan matters. Ali, the other thing that we watch matter a lot is you can afford to take more risk if you've got money.
Yeah. I believe
I,
that. I mean, I don't have
absolutely.
money, but I believe that would be true. If I had more money, I would be willing to risk certain things. Yeah. Because I wouldn't be as scared of the like financial repercussions as if I didn't if I had money, didn't have money.
Yep. Well, and I think that's an important part of the untapped process because if you're trying to go from point A to point B and there's a growth plan and there's a certain amount of risk that's involved, the question is, do we have the balance sheet and cash flows and lines of credit in place to basically navigate that?
Yeah.
So I was talking to somebody earlier in the week and they really have an incredible opportunity to take this business that they started 10 years ago and really ramp it up and probably make a lot of money. But when we
Yeah.
went in and looked at their balance sheet didn't make any sense at all, in
Gotcha.
terms of being strategically aligned with,
Hmm.
where they
Yeah.
wanted to go next. And so this is why the financial side of it is so important.
Got you.
The other thing that I want to talk about, Ali, is it's important, as you take risk to understand your core values.
Okay.
Because you're back to, well, how does risk taking help or hurt in the context of my core values? And so one of the things that I know, and again, I'm just going to go down my top 5 core values for a minute, but I have
Yeah.
wisdom is number one, and that comes
Mm-hmm.
from a lot of different sources. And
Yep.
then I've got personal growth, as my number two.
Yep.
And I've got number three, leading change. And then my number four is demonstrating courage. And then my number five is achieving financial success. So what I know is if somebody, you know, is involved with me as a coach or comes into, Untapped's membership site and
Yep.
they're not interested in those 5 things, then it won't be a long-term relationship. And,
Yeah. Well, and
as
you're
you
not
look,
saying that all of those things have to be in their top value system, but you're saying that they have to be open to all of those things.
there's a difference. You have to value the other person having those values. So,
Oh,
so,
okay. So I yeah, I
so
mean, I
yeah,
appreciate that those are your values, even though courage may not be one of my top five.
yep, that's
Got
exactly right.
it. Okay.
Yeah, and so the beauty of it is because courage is one of my top 5. I know a lot about courage,
Yeah. Well, and I think
and
you just like, what's the word? Like it peels
emanates.
off of you and attaches onto other people. You have that
Well,
aura of courage. You give people courage too. And that's where I think it's
thank
helpful.
you,
You're
thank you.
welcome.
And at the same time, I know you very, very well, and I watch all the time. When your 5 core values blend with mine and help me. And it makes
Yeah.
such a difference. But you're back to you need to also look at taking risk through the lens of my core values and how do I enhance and operate against my 5 core values as I'm taking this risk. And
So can
and
you
so
give me
this
an example of one that you've had over the years?
well, yeah, I mean by far the hardest and scariest one was well, I probably was not the kid everybody wanted to hang around in high school where their parents
That's
said,
what I wanted to hear. No, I'm just kidding.
yeah, yeah. So there's a few of my high school buddies that would probably chime in there. Uh, and then what I would say to you is later in life, when I left P&G,
Yep.
to leave a corporate environment, and again, I
Yeah.
navigated it by going to Merrill Lynch, but it was definitely, a change in direction,
Mm-hmm.
but ultimately that gave me the confidence later to leave Merrill Lynch, and that gave me
Yeah.
the confidence later to start my own firm. And
Yeah.
so risk taking is an acquired skill, and
Yeah.
it's a muscle that you develop over time. And was really fascinated. I was on LinkedIn this week, and there
Mm-hmm.
was a lady I knew that was at P&G and left, and she's just really fascinating to me. But she had just gotten certified as like a risk taking counselor for groups, where they go in and actually
Oh,
take
wow.
teams and small groups through risk taking exercises to build out that capability. And
Huh.
so yeah, and the reason this is so important, Ali, is the overall, and you and I have talked about it, the economic results that we're getting in this country right now are not good, you
No.
know. And when you go in and you look, you're not seeing companies aggressively invest back in their employees and in new business models and upstream R&D. And these are
Yep.
all signals that we've become risk adverse. And the
Yeah.
bottom line is if we don't invest in ourselves and we don't take risk, it's just a matter of time until the economy and our industries and our companies are just not as good. So you
Yeah.
did just a phenomenal job here doing some research for us and
Yeah.
talking about different people, who are well known today to be successful, but
Yeah.
they paid their dues. So, start out and just talk about you picked Rupert Murdoch, which is a
Yeah.
great
So
pick.
Rupert Murdoch, he became famous with his media conglomerate, right? The largest in the world. And he bought MySpace back in 2005, which was like a great time to buy MySpace, right? He bought it for just $180 million. So no big deal there, but obviously a really big social media presence. thinking that he could grow it similar to like a Facebook. And then just 6 years later, he was forced to sell it for $35 million. And he sent a tweet out, which I think is funny, but also I think is a really good example. But he sent a tweet that said, "We screwed up in every possible way after the sell." And I think one, it's just like the owning of the failure is one thing.
Yeah, sure.
And it's also almost like a mix of the acceptance of it too, knowing that, maybe this wasn't, I know a lot about media. I know a lot about film and books and newspapers, but maybe social media, owning a social media company isn't the thing that is what I'm good at.
So there's so many fascinating elements to this. So I
Yeah.
had the good fortune at one point to work for Carl Lindner,
Yeah.
and essentially he, grew up, in the dairy industry, and
Mm-hmm.
then eventually went on to buy Hunter Savings, and then he went
Yep.
from there, where he was on a bank board and eventually acquired Provident Bank, and then eventually acquired Great American Insurance.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing you want to say is these are things that he learned one step at a time.
Yeah.
He learned how to take baby steps and take a little more risk each time. And I
Yeah.
can remember at one point when I was working for him, he was levered 100 to 1. And for a lot of people, that would be like being on a trapeze without a net. But he had enough experience and he was smart enough that he knew how to manage that. So I
So when
think
you
so
say
much of,
levered 100 to 1, can you explain that a little bit further?
yeah, the way to think about it, Allie, is you go in and you say for each $100 that was invested, he only
Uh-huh.
had $1 of equity. So
Oh.
yeah, so that's a highly leveraged situation,
Yeah.
and and there's no doubt he had to go through the early 70s where inflation hit, interest rates went way up,
Yep.
and there was a period of time where he had to reconstruct his balance sheet and do things
Yeah.
differently, but he learned from that too. He navigated it. But I
Yep.
think when you look at Rupert, you're going, hey, at some point in time he started small, and then
Mm-hmm.
over time he built it up, because you just don't go into your pocket and make
Yeah.
that kind of a purchase. But the other thing that I love
Yeah.
about what you're saying, and it's so important,
Yeah.
there's definitely people that come into us as untapped clients. And as we pull on the string, we start to find out they've got a little bit of what I call victim blamer. For
Yep.
whatever reason, it's hard
Mm-hmm.
for them to basically take personal accountability and responsibility for their own actions, and
Yep.
and and what happens as a result of their actions. And so that's definitely a very
Yep.
important part of this journey, is
Yeah.
not only having courage, but also being able to take an objective inventory of what you did right and wrong. The other
Yep.
thing that we'll watch happen is, so often to be an effective risk taker, you have to go talk to people. You have to
Yeah.
go hear others' opinions, often that disagree with your own, and you
Mm-hmm.
have to sort through those.
Yeah.
So that's a great example where you're doing the growth plan and you're
Yep.
putting the relationship side together and saying, okay, who do I need to have a relationship with if I want to
Yep.
grow in this direction? So
Yeah.
that's really good. So you
That's
did end up with Warren Buffett on your list here too.
I did, because you always bring up Warren Buffett, and I was like, I know he's made a mistake.
Interesting.
But this one I thought was interesting because it was a mistake a little bit out of spite. And so I wanted to talk about that part of decision making.
Sure.
So basically, what had happened was Warren Buffett began purchasing shares of Berkshire Hathaway, a textile company, and the company started to decline. So Buffett made a deal with the CEO at the time that he would sell back shares. And so when the papers were delivered, I guess for Buffett to sign to sell back some shares, Stanton, the CEO, had changed the deal and made an offer for 1/8 of the point lower, which I'm hoping you can explain because I don't fully grasp
Sure.
that.
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
It's just 12 cents lower. An
Oh,
eighth
okay.
of, yeah, 12
Perfect.
cents.
So that basically pissed Warren Buffett off, right? So he got
I bet.
super mad. And instead of selling the shares, he ended up purchasing enough to take control of the company so that he could then fire Stanton, which is just funny. And of course, like, just wow, to have enough money to do that. But to make matters worse, the company still began to decline more and more and more. But Buffett kept the textile business, and then he kept it open for like 20 years after this. And then he pulled the plug. But he called his decision a $200 billion mistake. And for someone who just seems very strategic in his planning of what he's going to buy or how he's going to purchase a company, to make this decision, I felt like was a little bit uncharacteristic of him in a way, but kind of also out of spite that, like, I can't believe you would try to go against me and get less money or more money. And now I'm just going to buy the whole company.
Well, and one of the things, and it's interesting, Allie, as a rule, Buffett every year in the annual report tells people what the dumb decisions were that they made. So he's a
That's
great
really,
role model,
yeah,
yeah, an example of somebody that doesn't cover it up.
yeah,
And so that's really reassuring to the
yeah,
people that will invest behind him. Now, at the same time, when you go in and you look at, well, Warren, how did you make that mistake? And it's interesting because Untapped is actually designed to help a person avoid this mistake. And if you
yeah,
said, John, what do you mean by that?
yep,
We talk a lot about Porter's five forces and going
okay,
in and doing industry analysis.
yep,
We actually talk even higher than that. We look at the country finances, and that's interesting to
yeah,
do right now. Then we go
mm-hmm,
in and we look at industries and capital flows in and out of the industry. Then we look
yeah,
at the profitability in the industry. And
yeah,
then you go in and you look at the returns on capital. And Allie, you look at it on two fronts. One, if I'm buying the shares, what return am I getting if the cash flow stays the same? But
okay,
more importantly, if they retain earnings and reinvest it, what's the reinvestment rate of return look like? And so Warren actually went into an industry that attracted and eventually hurt a lot of what they call value investors. Value investors try to buy things on the cheap, and
okay,
Warren basically stepped into an industry which was a very difficult changing industry, and he got hurt. And
yeah,
so what's interesting is if he came through on TAP's process, I think we really have a design in our process to help people avoid that kind of mistake. But at the
yeah,
same time, I don't want to second guess him because what he did do very well is he made a series of acquisitions over time that gave
yeah,
him more and more capital to invest, which
yeah,
also gave him room to make mistakes. So
yeah,
when you go in and look at him buying an insurance company, it was
mm-hmm,
often, how do I get more money to invest more money? And
yeah,
insurance companies are a great way to do it. But yeah,
yeah.
that is a great story. I love it. So your next example is you went to J.K. Rowling.
J.K. Rowling, because so I tried to do like different types of failure, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. But so J.K. Rowling, I mean, I think it's pretty well known that she had wrote this book, but she delivered it to like 12 publishing agencies, and they were all rejected. I mean, and this took a while. Like, she was divorced, she was on welfare, she and had a child to support, maybe two children to support, even at this time. So she was really struggling financially, trying to get this book published, and no one would take it, no one would buy it. And then finally, a year later, Bloomberg's accepted it and extended a very small, like €1,500 advance. And hands down was like the best decision that Bloomsburg ever made. But I think one thing here of just like sometimes failure takes a lot. It may feel like failure, but eventually can become a success. And so thinking of just some things take time, and it can be really hard, but what seemed so difficult for her now, she's probably like, that year was probably the hardest year of her life, but in the long end, that hard work that she put in has gained this huge success where now she has more money than the queen, even.
So there's so many beautiful elements to this. So Allie, first of all, she had a dream. She had a
Mm-hmm.
clear life purpose. And when you look at her core values supported her, as
Yeah.
essentially she and the whole family went through really, really difficult times. And so there's a certain amount of perseverance that's just required
Yeah.
sometimes to get through hard periods. But it also is just a great example of, and we call it, failing forward. She
Mm-hmm.
had to talk to different people and be turned down before she could eventually find the right thing. I
Yep.
know if we study Edison and people like that, they talk
Mm-hmm.
about how do I fail forward quickly so I accelerate the learning and
Yeah.
basically get the people that don't fit out. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's just a great example of it just took time
Yeah.
and sometimes a little prayer too.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
you have another one here, and I'm loving it. You got Robert T. Kiyosaki, the
Yes.
rich dad, poor dad guy. And
Yep.
based on what you're telling me here is Mr. Kiyosaki hit the wall for a little bit, huh?
Well, and this is the same type of idea with perseverance. Instead of like a book trying to get to sell, it's more of he had like five failed businesses before he became successful. And he really didn't become successful until he was like 50. And I think that's the other part here of like, you obviously see all these like Forbes 30 under 30, or I mean, even Warren was well off before he was 40. And so for Robert here, I mean, he had three failed businesses by the time he was like 35. They all went bankrupt, but he never gave up and he kept trying to learn and succeed. And then he finally did. And now has this great book, the Rich Dad Poor Dad book, which we talk about a lot and will
Yeah.
continue to talk about. But it didn't happen until he was over 50 years old.
Not a great story. We also know this to be true about Colonel Sanders.
Oh,
You
really?
know,
I didn't know that.
yep,
Tell me his story.
yeah, yeah. Just again, he didn't hit it until he was in his 70s.
Oh,
So it
wow.
just gets back to sometimes the incubation period and the learning takes a while to monetize, and then
Yeah.
eventually get there. But
Yep.
but I just think it's back to having a plan, having a vision, knowing who you are, knowing your
Yep.
limitations. And it is interesting to me. So often people need financial help. This is a little bit of a lecture I'll give to the investment community in Cincinnati. We're just we're so risk adverse, and we
Hmm.
seem to want to put money in the big public companies. And I would
Yeah.
say, yeah, that's worked real well. Buying an index has worked real well for a long time. But the reality is we need much more investment back through local and community channels. And sometimes it needs to start with investing in a son or a daughter or a grandchild or a neighbor kid that grew up around you. And
Yeah.
I do think, when we go look, I think the days of just milking existing business models without them reinvesting, I think, we're at the end of that.
Yeah.
And I'll be glad when we start to see more of that behavior. The other
Hmm.
thing, and Allie, I'm going to take a shot here. As the government changes the rules one more time so flippantly and takes the tax rate from 21 up to 28 on C corps, it's like they do not understand the impact that they're going to have on companies' willingness to reinvest cash flow and take risk.
Yeah.
And it's just going to siphon the money off towards government entities. And it
Hmm.
is not the right move for this economy, especially when we're in head-to-head combat with China.
Yeah.
And it's like, come on, guys. When's the state going to be supportive of the business, not taking away? And
Yep.
the problem I've got is I go look at so many systems that the government stepped into, and they don't manage it well. And
Yeah.
at a time when I think we should be talking about how the government can partner better with people, whether it's nonprofits or business, I think there's a big opportunity.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox. So the next thing you did, I love how you set this up, is you went after Ray Dalio's principle for learning from mistakes.
Yeah.
And so should I just read them and talk about them for a second, and
Yeah.
then we'll
Here,
kind
I
of
can read
wrap
them.
up? Okay.
Yeah, I can read them real quick for us. So don't feel bad about your mistakes or those of others. Love them.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
then
And it's
recognize that
funny, we do
mistakes
it with
are,
little kids. We do it with Trey, right?
yeah,
Trey makes a
exactly.
mistake and we love him and say, okay, you learned from that. So it's
Oh,
like, why
100%.
do we change that? With our spouses and with ourselves, especially.
Well, and I
Okay.
think people like to keep it hidden. I think, especially with like social media and everything too, of like you have to show this perfect, that you're perfect and everything's great. Well, there's also time to celebrate things that you made errors on as well.
Yep.
So
Sense of humor helps too.
that's true. Recognize that mistakes are a natural part of the evolutionary process.
Yep. It's
Teach
all
and
part of growing.
Which, yeah, exactly. Teach and reinforce that merits of mistake-based learning. Reinforce the merits of mistake-based learning, which I think is good for me right now, of Trey. So be self-reflective and make sure your people are self-reflective. I can't read today. Be self-reflective and make sure your people are self-reflective.
I have to make a sidebar comment. So
Yeah.
before every Facebook Live, Allie makes me do yellow leather, red leather. So
Red leather,
basically,
yellow leather. I didn't do it today. So that's, you can tell.
all
You can
right,
tell that
keep
I
going.
didn't do my word strength train.
See, you're being self-reflective.
Exactly. Create a culture in which it's okay to make mistakes and unacceptable not to learn from them.
That's big. Yeah,
And then,
Allie, it's interesting.
yeah,
Having started a company, one of the first things you have to do is to be able to identify problems and then
yeah,
to analyze and fix the problems. And when you make mistakes, you have to be okay to talk about it.
for
And at
sure.
one point, I worked with somebody who had gotten straight A's on all their report cards. And just anytime there was a mistake, it was just really hard for that person, to admit that there was an opportunity for us. And so I
Yeah,
would just say, be careful. Your straight
yeah,
A's are great. They're important. But at the same time, you're only going to really learn, and the organization's only going to learn if we can own up to and identify these problem areas.
agreed. So pain plus reflection equals progress.
Yeah, sure. It's good.
Create guardrail rails when needed, and remember it's better not to guardrail at all.
Yeah, so I think we're back to this little kid from Japan going to get the meal. It's like there were a lot of guardrails there, and they
Yeah,
learned a lot by not having it. And so at the same time, you watch certain parents and you see it on the playground who are just, don't do that, Johnny. Don't do that, Susie. And it's like, you're not
yeah,
helping them. They need to learn to take risk. If you take that decision away from them every single time, they're not going to learn. Yep.
exactly. And diagnose problems to get at their root causes,
Yeah. Yeah.
which I think
That's
is
good.
big on, because most of the time the problem isn't just like the outcome. There's other things that have happened in order to get there.
Yeah. It's interesting how there's a drill called the 5 whys, where you just keep
Okay.
pulling and asking the question why, and it's a wonderful tool for that
Mhm.
diagnosis.
Yeah,
Okay, so bottom line,
sure.
what we're advocating for is failure is not a bad thing. It's a learning opportunity, and it's all a
Exactly.
matter of how do you create that internally for yourself, in your marriage, with your family, with your company, with your friends. We're
Yeah,
here to support one another and try new things and keep growing. So it's all
exactly.
important. So we're just
Exactly.
back to by design. Things aren't perfect. We're not perfect. And
Nope.
it's a big learning adventure from the day we're born to the day we check out. And the more you can look at it that way, the better off you are. And
Exactly.
beware of that perfection card. It'll
Hmm.
slow you down. All right.
Exactly.
Hey, thank you. Great
This
job
was
on the
great.
notes today. Yeah, that was
Yeah,
fun. Very good.
that
All
was
right. Have a great
wonderful.
week.
All
Have a
right.
great
Have a good
weekend.
weekend. We'll be back next week.
See ya. Thanks, Allie.
Bye.
Bye bye.